lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm doing the end of year book tag because we are now drifting through November. At time of filming it is the 1st of November, but you guys probably won't see this release another week, and I'm aware that we are rapidly losing the year, so I just figured this was a good time to do this tag. I will put down below if I can find the original person for this tag, etc, etc, but it's one of these like booktube classics that's been around for quite a while now, so I don't know if I will be able to find that information. So it's just a bunch of books about reading plans for the end of this year and the beginning of next year. The first question is, are there any books that you've started that you need to finish before the end of the year? As well as the kind of books that I'm currently reading that I definitely will finish before the end of the year, I do actually have one technically on the go that I don't think I'm going to get to, and that's the first 4 books in the Earthsea Trilogy, the Earthsea series by Ursula K. Le Guin. I've read the first 2 books and I actually started book 3 back at the beginning of September and then decided that I wasn't really in the mood for it. So I've technically marked this book as DNF Return To on my Goodreads because I do need to finish off the other 2. This is a classic in sci-fi / fantasy. Ursula K. Le Guin wrote a lot of books, I think around the kind of 50s and 60s, and this one is about a young wizard called Ged, and the first book is about his kind of journey training to be a wizard, and then the next ones is kind of bouncing off and doing other things in the world, but he is still a major part of that. They're fun in the sense that like you can see what books they're then going to later go on to inspire, which is one of the reasons I really enjoy reading classics, is you can see the roots of other books of where they've come from and where they're going to go. But as far as an actual series itself, it's not really keeping me particularly captured, so I don't know if I am actually going to get around to finishing it this year, but I do want to finish off the bind up because I have it and I think it'd be nice to finish off the series. The next question is, do you have any autumnal books to help you with the transition towards the end of the year? And to be honest, I kind of did most of that in October rather than November. I read a lot more spooky books and things like that. Once we hit November, we get non-fiction November, so I always end up reading a lot more non-fiction at this time of year, clearly. And then December is really kind of ticking off a lot of the yearly TBRs I have. So I wouldn't say there's anything that really transitions me into this particular time of year. I'm not necessarily one who goes for specific genres at specific times of year. I was reading more spooky books for October and I enjoyed that, so I probably will continue with those. And I do have a video about some of the horror books I read recently that I'll link down below. Are there any new releases that I'm waiting for? I am terrible at paying attention to new releases, and also I think with this year, with the pandemic, a second lockdown happening in the UK at the moment, etc, etc, I honestly don't know what's happening to release schedules, just both locally, nationally and across the world. So I'm gonna skip this one and just move on. I know that Becky Chambers is coming out with a new book soon, but I don't know if that's planned this year or potentially the beginning of next year. But once that one is out, I am going to try and read book 4 of the Wayfarer series because I'm really excited about that. But that's the only thing that immediately springs to mind. Okay, the next question is, what are 3 books that you need to finish before the end of the year? So I have an inadvertent mountain of yearly TBRs that I'm desperately trying to work my way through before the end of the year hits. We're going to talk about yearly TBRs a bit later with one of the other questions. So I've picked 3 books off of that I just wanted to highlight a little bit more that I haven't talked about particularly recently. One of those is Turgenev's book Rudin. This is, I don't actually know what it's about at all. A Man in Russian Society. It's a Russian classic basically, and I had on my classics TBR to read at least one Russian classic. I'm doing really well with my classics TBR, but I'm determined to get to this one because I wanted to read something from Russia last year and I didn't get a chance to either. I was supposed to be reading War and Peace and it just didn't happen. So I'd feel really, really bad if I got all the way through and didn't end up reading anything from Russia again. So I'm very determined for this one. And my dad gave me this and another book from Turgenev specifically because of that sort of desire to read more from Russia. So again, I'd feel really bad if I didn't get to this one. The other 2 are from my author's TBR. I want to read a book by Naomi Novik, and so it makes sense to go for the first book in the Temeraire series. This is also really fitting because I finished off my Dragon series that I had on the go by Marie Brennan towards earlier on in the year, so I'd like to jump back in with another Dragon book. I kind of like having a Dragon series on the go. This is a reimagining of the Napoleonic Wars but with dragons, and it's a fairly like classic staple in the fantasy world, so I'd like to know what all the hype is about. The other author that I really wanted to read another book by is Matt Haig, and I have The Dead Fathers Club, which is actually a reimagining of Hamlet. I quite like Matt Haig. I think he has a really lovely feel-good, warm, speculative fiction kind of style. All his books remind me of like a warm hug or like getting into like a nice cozy bathtub or something. So I think that he is perfect, especially for later on in the year. I was planning on doing a whole like Shakespeare series about Shakespeare retellings towards the beginning of the year, and then I realised that I didn't actually want to read most of them because most of them were YA, so I scrapped that idea completely. But this is one of the books that I had bought for that, so it'd be quite good to get to this one. He has got a new book out recently called The Midnight Library, which is doing very, very well, so I might pick up that one instead. I like Hamlet though, so I don't see any reason why I wouldn't enjoy this Hamlet retelling, and I think it's gonna be really interesting. Question whatever we're on now is there a book that you think could still shock you and become a new favourite of the year? And for me, I'm actually going to end up picking I think it's called the Exgenesis Trilogy by Octavia E. Butler. I read book 1 called Dawn literally last month in October and absolutely loved it. Total surprise out of nowhere, and I've got the audiobooks for book 2 and book 3, and my intention is to try and get through at least one, maybe both of them in December. So if I do that, I think it might end up making its way onto her favourites. It was a real surprise out of nowhere. I hadn't actually paid any attention before getting it as to what the book was about, but I am taking part in the Octavia E. Butler slow read along, so I knew that at some point I was going to get to it, and I ended up subbing this one in rather than the book that they're currently reading at the moment because I'm just having a few supply issues for it. So what is the book about? Basically, it's about a world where our world has gone completely to shit, and there are a bunch of human beings that have been rescued by an alien species, but they've kind of kept them in sort of a cryogenic status, and they're sort of slowly waking them up to try and find out about them and see how they could possibly help humanity kind of recover as a species. So you get a really nice blend of learning about this cool alien species and their world and like their society and culture and how they work, but you also get this lovely outsider look onto humans in general and kind of discussions about what makes us good but also what makes us bad, and kind of these general hints as to how things went terribly wrong on the planet. And I really enjoyed the first book, and it came as a massive shock because it was just one that, you know, you just grab a book and you don't really check what it's about beforehand, and you're like, I know the vague genre and I think that'll be fun. Maybe you don't do that when you read, but I do occasionally, and it was really good. And then the final question is, have you started making reading plans for 2021 already? So I think 2020 has illustrated that making plans is a total waste of fucking time on the planet because global pandemics are a thing. So in a lot of ways 2020 has been a really good reading year for me because of being in furlough for huge chunks of it. I got loads of reading done, and it was really interesting because I got far more into like nature writing, non-fiction and history books and things like that. Like I hosted a bunch of readathons and things, but it really also illustrated that actually doing these big year-long reading plans is quite stressful in some ways, and something which I don't think I'm going to do next year. So I have either 6 or 7 yearly TBRs on the go at the moment, all of which that have at least 10 books on them, which means that's actually a commitment of 60 to 70 books that I say I'm definitely going to read by the end of the year, which, like, it's not that I'm not interested in those books, but that just doesn't give me quite the wiggle room that I want to be able to do things like find cool new readathons that I didn't know I wanted to take part in, rediscover brand new genres that I had no idea that I liked and want to read. Like I got into contemporary romance and read like 15 of them in the summer, doing random rereads, all these kinds of things. So I'm gonna approach 2021 differently, and my goal is to not put out any yearly TBRs at all, but instead to have a slightly different focus each month, and then that way use that as a way of kind of exploring my reading and getting to things on my TBR that I didn't like, I haven't really prioritised enough. So I want to do things like, you know, where you kind of group your Goodreads TBR by like the highest number of ratings or lowest number of ratings, or like highest average rating or page counts or specific subgenres or all sorts of things like that. So that is going to be my goal instead, rather than doing these really, really big yearly TBRs that I then feel kind of a massive external pressure to read. And I'm sure a bunch of you are going to be sat there being like, Emma, you could just not read those books and like no one would actually care. I care. Because the whole point to this channel when I first started it was to give myself an external pressure to prioritize my reading and keep me accountable for reading from like a diverse range of genres, authors, backgrounds, etc, etc. And one thing that will happen if I start to allow myself to create videos which are TBRs that I then don't even vaguely attempt to stick to, is that then the whole thing will just kind of, I'm giving myself an out the whole time. So my intention is, if I put out a 10 classics I want to read in 2020, I want to then make sure I read the majority, like at least 9, if not all 10, out of those classics. And that's just been a little bit too much pressure to put myself on this year. So I'm going to change it up for next year, but it will still give me the room to be able to keep reading diversely in the way that I want to, but it also means that I can kind of react to how the year goes a little bit more and react to various kind of changes in my taste in reading and how my mood reading sort of progresses. And it means if I suddenly find that I'm like super into a random genre that I'm not currently reading at the moment, I can have the ability to just binge 20 books in that genre without feeling like it's taking up a huge percentage of my like allocated reading for that year. I hope that made sense. So this was the end of year book tag. I'm going to tag anybody who's watching this who has a channel who hasn't done it already. I think it's a really cool way of looking back on the year and kind of reflecting on your reading in general. And like I said, I will try and link originals and things like that in the comments down below or description box down below if they are still available. It's been around for a while now. That is it from me. Have a wonderful reading week and I'll chat to you soon. Bye!